Hello, friends. Welcome back to MXP Oakland. Great modern event that we're covering all weekend. I'm Reed Duke here with Jarvis Yu. Jarvis, did you have a chance to take a look at Phyrexian Awakening, our preview card?
Yeah, cool card. Obviously, it's hard to tell what the set will be like, but definitely a throwback and reminds me weirdly of booze or food or whatever, 2 mana trinkety token you can think of.
Yeah, for sure. Incubate. Yeah, I'm right there with you. It's hard to draw a bead on exactly how powerful it's going to be, but Phyrexian Awakening seems like a cool card for limited. Like you're basically getting a 4/4 creature for the price of 5 mana, but you can spend that mana split over 2 turns, and then if Phyrexia All Will Be One is any indicator, there are going to be a ton of Phyrexian creatures. So the static ability of giving them all vigilance definitely going to be pretty nice. We have another preview card that I'll say that I'm even more excited about that we'll show off later. But for now, we have Magic to show you. It is Michael Lee with Golgari Yawgmoth against Chase Goda with 5-color creativity. I
So,
believe we saw this matchup on
mhm.
camera yesterday. And in that match, it was creativity advancing. But, I wouldn't be surprised if Michael Lee has had to beat some creativity players to get this far in the tournament. What's your take?
My take is he literally has not played against creativity yet, so I just checked his pairings real quick.
Wow, look at you doing your homework. Okay, so give us, the couple sentence. What's his path to have gotten to 8-1 with Golgari Yawgmoth?
So apparently you could get buys by playing trials on Friday. So he had two buys. Then he won a Golgari Yawgmoth Mirror. He beat Amulet Titan. Then he actually lost to Alex Lynn playing Bring to Light Scape Shift, which makes sense to me. He actually triumphed over Rakdos Scam, which I do think is one of the more difficult matchups. Then he defeated an Izzet Murktide. Then he beat the Jeskai Boros deck. Then he beat Amulet Titan.
All right. Well, if he can even the score against these multicolor red and six decks, then he'll probably feel pretty good about his position. But
Mhm.
I think you said to me yesterday that you felt this was a tough matchup for Golgari Yawgmoth. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. I think generally creativity is actually pretty good at managing the small creatures between Ren and Six and Lightning Bolt. And its combo, I would say, is a little bit more compact and not that easy for Yawgmoth to interact with without the presence of the actual card Yawgmoth itself to gun down the tokens.
Okay, well, let's see. Michael Lee is going to want to have a pretty strong draw on the play. Die roll here matters a lot, not just because it's a pure race, but also the specific pattern of Ren and Six coming down to kill like a Birds of Paradise or an Ignoble Hierarch is really, I'll say, stressful as a Yawgmoth player.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. Sometimes Ren and Six is really the best possible card in a matchup, and sometimes it just leads to you floating out.
Normally, I'd be surprised to see Yawgmoth starting on tapped land, but it's not necessarily bad if Michael has a hand that's more about like Wall of Roots, which is resilient to damage based removal,
Mhm.
or just going straight for Strangleroot Geist here. That's not bad either. I'll remind everybody this is a closed deck list tournament, at least for the Swiss portion. So players don't have full information about what one another are playing, but we are talking about round 9 and two players that have been near the top tables. So it's not impossible to think that, maybe they sat next to each other a previous round, or they have a general concept of what the opponent's archetype might be while they're making mulligan decisions.
By the way, if Chase plays Dwarven Mine as the second land, would you conclude that he has a land light hand?
Yeah, I mean you're not going to play the Dwarven Mine if you have three. non-Dwarven Mine mountains, but it could be the case that Chase just has exactly 3 lands and wants the 3rd
Mhm.
land to enter untapped. Could be the case that he has multiple Dwarven Mines. But to your point, Jarvis, that's a really important thing to note and to always think about, like, what clues does that give me about my opponent's hand and mana situation.
Is that no? That is a forest. I was going to ask if it was the Dryad Arbor, but okay. So actually, exactly to your point, he was thinking about what creature to play on turn 2. It was the exact dilemma of Geist versus Wall of Roots.
Yeah, but this has worked out really well. This is one of the important things, important uses of Strangleroot Geist in this deck is finishing off a weakened Planeswalker. Otherwise, you would just get like totally bodied by a Ren and 6 or a Teferi coming down and minusing,
Mhm.
and then the opponent being able to untap with it the following turn. But Strangleroot Geist does a nice job evening the score, and even though Michael Lee has been slow out of the gates, this is a totally fine position for him to find himself in. It's just that the next 2 turns are going to have to go well, and he's going to have to start doing something pretty special.
Okay, if I saw Chase's hand correctly, it's Lightning Bolt, Spell Pierce, Indomitable Creativity, and another Fable. That's a really, really strong hand on this board state.
Yeah, especially when you basically know your creativity is going to resolve against the Yawgmoth player, so you can use Lightning Bolt and Spell Pierce to stop anything bad from happening, and then just set up your own combo to go over the top and win the game. Okay, using the Wall of Roots mana for Ignoble Hierarch, to me that hints at Chord of Calling.
Mm-hmm.
So usually, if you use the Wall of Roots mana before you tap your lands, it means that you want to use the Wall of Roots twice on that turn cycle, which would mean casting an instant.
Is it also possible that he'll cast Eldritch Evolution this turn, which is the other reason to use Wall of Roots first, if you're consider sacrificing the Wall of Roots?
Yeah, that could certainly be the case.
But I think I did see a Chord of Calling real quick, the M13 version. Oh, that one cannot be Spell Pierced. Uh-oh. Mm, yeah, I think Michael was just like, nope, can't Spell Pierce it. But I think there's a brief judge intervention about to happen.
I've actually had this exact thing come up
Okay.
of can you spell pierce / negate a grist?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is you cannot, because it counts as a creature when it's on the stack.
Right. I guess the other question is, like, Chase basically said, yeah, I'm going to go fetch and shock in my thing, then try to spell pierce. How much of that is allowed to be rewound because he was trying to make a play that's not valid?
Good question, Jarvis. I would like to be careful in not
Mm-hmm.
pretending I'm a judge, and
Right.
I'm a big fan of, like, let's honor the judge's ruling on the floor, whatever they say. But
Okay.
my, like, intuition for how that should be handled is that Chase made a strategic mistake
Mm-hmm.
up to the point that he actually cast Spell Pierce, and the
Right.
actual casting of Spell Pierce is an illegal play, so that should not be allowed. But
Yeah.
everything leading up to that point, it seems to me that's just
Mm-hmm.
a mistake. Like,
Right.
if I make a big attack and say, "Well, I thought you were going to die to my attack," that's on me that I
Right.
miscounted.
Yeah. So I think the judge allowed the fetching of the mine. So whatever the judge said was fine, I would be okay with. Again, I'm also not a judge.
This is also why I don't like to shortcut when I play tournament
Right.
Magic. So for me,
Hmm.
it's like, no, you're not casting Spell Pierce. You have a fetch land on the battlefield. Let's resolve the fetch land and then take
Right.
the next step after that. And then it avoids sort of uncomfortable situations like that.
Agree with you 100%. So now for Chase's turn, we're resolving the chapter 2 on Fable. Seems like you probably should discard the Spell Pierce by this point.
Yeah, Spell Pierce is not very good against Yawgmoth in the first place because the deck is mostly
Right.
creatures. Not to say that you can never tag a Chord of Calling or an Eldritch Evolution, but especially when it's now known to the opponent, there should be a lot of flexibility for Michael Lee to play around it.
By the way, it looks to me as though we can get a creativity for 2 this turn, which seems like it might be too much from Michael to come back from. Ooh, is this the cheeky Dryad Arbor block? So you don't have to block with Ignoble Hierarch?
Yeah, so Michael really wants to keep Grist around because that's sort of his plan for the long
Hmm.
term. You said it, Jarvis. I don't think a lot of these like gritty details are going to wind up mattering because Chase just has creativity.
Hmm.
Um, but we're getting word that there's actually a pause and maybe the judges, you know, straightening something out. But we're just gonna, you know, pause with Michael Lee's Verdant Catacombs ability on the stack here.
Hmm.
Um, Meanwhile, Jarvis, I want to get your 2 cents on what did you learn from watching the giant event in Europe this morning and yesterday.
So I will, well, hope I'm not spoiling it for people who haven't watched it, but a well-known MTGO player, Respect the Cat, actually won the tournament. His name is Marcus Like. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And he played Karuga 5-color elementals.
Five
But
color Karuga. You
yeah,
must have said the wrong companion there, Jarvis. No,
no, I
you mean
didn't.
Kakira. Okay, so tell me how Karuga works.
Well, so there's a huge restriction on Karuga, which is you can't play cheap cards, but the deck has 4 Fire Ice for deck on. It doesn't play Ren 6 because you're not allowed to play Ren 6. It has Teferi Time Raveler, and he had the Risen Reef plus Elshnorin set up. So basically, like you can't play Kahira if you're playing Elshnorin because it's obviously not the correct creature type. But Risen Reef plus Elshnorin is a pretty potent combination once you assemble them together. Like basically, the number of cards you draw, it gets way too large for any fair deck to overcome.
About how you just think Elshnorn is a really effective card in Modern right now, so that makes good
Yeah.
sense. The Karuga restriction is basically what the Cascade decks do
Hmm.
already, right? So it seems reasonable. What aside from the winning player, any other takeaways from the event? I had the
Hmm.
metagame breakdown pulled up yesterday, and it looked like it was pretty diverse. With Is It Murktide being the most played deck?
Hmm. So what actually happened was in the top 16, I believe there were 8 creativity decks of sorts, four
Holy
in the
smokes!
four in the top 8, and from my understanding, there were 20 Fable of the Mirror Breakers in the top 8.
Wow. So it's not just for standard anymore. It's not just for standard, pioneer, and legacy anymore. It's in modern. It's dominating modern too.
Yeah, just kind of an interesting, kind of interesting to see how good creativity is doing there and also doing here. Like the deck is just performing very, very, very well.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Okay, we're going to show you a little bit of our backup match here. We have Asha Emmett Mills, who is an Azorius control player that we saw on camera 1 or 2 times, maybe 2 times yesterday
Mhm.
against Robert Moore, Teamer Rhinos. We also saw him. Notably, different records here. Asha is 7-1-1 with Azorius control, and Robert is 7-2, whereas our main feature match players, that was an 8-1 match.
Yeah, I think Asha, they played very, very well to win versus Is It Murktide yesterday. But I even think the matchup for Team of Rhinos is better, given that they've chosen to register Chalice of the Void.
Right. We saw Chalice of the Void doing good work against Is It Murktide yesterday, but that card, of course, is a lot more potent and straightforward when you play against a Cascade deck who their
Mhm.
whole deck is based around resolving a 0 mana spell.
So I'm interested to see if Asha knows if Robert is on Team of Rhinos, but there's some red flags here, I think, based on how the lands were played out and based on the game actions taken by Robert.
Okay. Anything specific that we can learn
Well,
from?
what kind of team or deck doesn't play anything on turns 1 or 2, right?
Okay. Now the cat is totally out of the bag.
Yep.
So we're going to give you an update on our main feature match as soon as we have one. But my understanding is that they're paused and they're discussing something. Okay, we're back. Hopefully, we'll get our elite squad down on the floor to fill us in on exactly what happened. But we can piece together that the dwarf token attacked the grist, verdant catacombs fetched a dryad arbor and blocked, and now Chase is resolving an indomitable creativity for one. Which the good news is it would have been for two if the dwarf
Mhm.
token didn't trade in combat. So a game that would be totally far gone from Michael's perspective is now only maybe a little bit far gone.
I have a question for you. Do you think it's interesting that the dwarf chose to attack and trade with the Dryad Arbor instead of just being creativity into an Archon?
It is interesting, and my read on that is that you know Chase just thought it wasn't gonna trade in combat,
Hmm.
which it's one thing if you are a Golgari Yawgmoth player and you eat, sleep, and breathe Dryad Arbor, but if you aren't thinking in those terms, you just see Verdant Catacombs. It's like, oh, that's a land. I'm safe to
Okay,
attack.
sure.
So it's one of those things about modern having a lot of different decks and a lot of quarter case plays,
Hmm.
and it really takes an extreme volume of experience and sometimes experience with a lot of different decks before you can really start to speak that language.
Fair enough. I also remembered Chase had a lightning bolt in hand, but maybe that was had already been cast.
All right. So, what can a Yawgmoth deck do to beat an Archon of Cruelty? Normally, you could use Grist, and yeah, I guess it is going to be a fresh Grist deployed to try to kill that thing off.
Right.
The thing that's brutal about this creativity deck, though, is you get one Archon on the battlefield, and then your opponent has to scramble to catch up. But you, in the meantime, have gotten this huge influx of resources, so it becomes easier and easier each time to just rebuild and do it again.
So I think there's a potential explanation for only creativity from one Western, which was Chase wanted to leave up lightning bolt. Um, I'm not saying that's necessarily the best route to go about it, but it does make some amount of sense. Yeah, it's
Um,
just
By the way, folks, the life totals are off. We're gonna get that corrected.
ooh. I like this play. Bouncing a Fable with Teferi, don't mind if I do.
Oh yeah, that's great, especially if you're looking to dig deeper and find some more action.
Yeah, this is still going to be an uphill battle for Michael. I think he doesn't even have his fourth land.
Well, he traded off his fourth land, blocking the dwarf token. Okay, here's
Board
a
for two.
main phase chord for 2, get another Strangleroot Geist, so he's just trying to build out his board, which is
Mhm.
this is a huge thing when piloting the Yawgmoth deck. The goal basically is to get your mana and a few creatures solidly underneath you, and then when you can put Yawgmoth on the battlefield, it becomes really, really powerful. But it's not always just about like, let me race the Yawgmoth as quickly as possible.
Yeah, you got to build up that sacrificial material, right?
Exactly, exactly.
So one Archon down. This person actually does play the full 4 Archons, which I would say I think it makes your deck easier to play to just play 4 Archons. So I probably would do it myself, but there are reasons to play 3. It does like what's the best way of putting it? It eats up cards that you can draw that are bad to draw, if that makes sense.
Yeah, basically just with 4 Archons, you have 4 copies of card that's really crummy to see in your opening hand, right?
Right.
So this is one of those games where Michael is thinking like, yeah, I can beat what's on the board, but my opponent has a really powerful deck and a stacked hand. And if they kind of ever find anything, I'm in big trouble. And this looks to me like it's going to be a hard cast Archon, which should
Hmm.
be plenty good and not quite
Oh,
as impressive as
well, what about persist?
creativity. Yep, persist works too. It's the same effect at a discounted price.
It's true. Two is a lot less than 4.
Michael still has a relatively high life total, so his best bet would be to just go straight for a Yawgmoth combo, but he doesn't have enough resources to make that happen, and he's going to scoop up game number 1.
Well, let me ask you about that. From 14 life, you tap out for your Yawgmoth, say, both of your Geists are untapped, and they both have +1/+1 counters. What's the route to victory from there?
It's going to be really difficult if you have just 2 creatures that already have counters
Right.
on them and nothing else.
Hmm.
That's where something you would love to have your Verdant Catacombs and fetch your Dryad Arbor to get the
Yep.
ball rolling. But yeah, you'd have to. You probably couldn't do it. You'd
Right.
have to start
Hmm.
with um, sacking one Geist to remove a counter from the other one and drawing a card. Then you can sacrifice your other Geist, and at this point you've drawn 2 cards. So maybe you draw a land and a Birds of Paradise. You use the Birds of Paradise to reset Geist, so you're getting another
Hmm.
2 cards out of it. Now you can draw an Endurance and a green card, but I don't see any way to get any traction there. You need like one more resource before you can really get the ball rolling there.
So we do have a Sundering Titan in the sideboard. It looks like we're cutting an Archon of Cruelty and a Teferi Time Raveler for 2 Veil of Summers. Not?
That was
Maybe I'm.
Sundering Titan coming in, which to me, there's no way you're going to convince me that Sundering Titan is better than Archon of Cruelty. What you could
Yeah.
convince me of is I'm very scared of Necromentia naming Archon of
Mhm.
Cruelty, and I want to have some backup plan.
I think that's probably it because I think most of the Yawgmoth lists I looked at in the last week or two had basically 1 to 2 copies of Necromentia.
Hmm. And so bringing in the Titan once again, if I'm creativiting for 2 and I hit Sundering Titan and Archon of Cruelty, I'm a happy camper. That's good
Mhm.
enough. but bringing in the Titan makes it so that I might not really be excited to go for a creativity for one on the off chance I hit my weaker creature and wind up losing from that position.
Yeah, for those of you who are asking, Chase only has one sideboard target, and it's one Sundering Titan. The rest of the sideboard is 3 Strike It Rich, 3 Wear Tear, 3 Veil of Summer, 2 Turn of the Earth, which I guess technically would do something, but I probably wouldn't do it. 2 Flusterstorm, and a Boseiju.
Let's talk about Veil of Summer. What's
Mm-hmm.
interesting there is Veil of Summer would be a really weak card in game number 1 in the matchup, but it
Mm-hmm.
does line up well against some of what Michael might be boarding in against Chase. Would you be turning to Veil of Summer?
I might have a very small number of copies of it in my deck and not a large copy. Interesting enough, Michael doesn't actually have Necromentia in the sideboard, just 3 copies of Thoughtseize. And actually, I probably no to Macus of the Moon because it doesn't work for Lightning Bolt very well. But I think that Thoughtseizes are pretty much a slam dunk.
Yeah, and keeping in mind that these players do have to operate with unknown sideboards. So,
Right.
if you're a creativity player, you might just be like, well, I'm always going to expect Necromentia, so I'm gonna prepare my sideboard plan accordingly. And I certainly think that's what's going on with the Sundering Titan. We'll see about Veil of Summer.
Question for you: if you are Michael, would you side in Shieldred the Apocalypse in this matchup?
I would not. I think
Okay.
it's close.
Right.
The creativity deck is so tough to deal with because Shouldred is good against some of the controlling elements. Like if I'm worried about Lightning Bolt and Ren and 6, then I might want to be moving a little bit away from my fragile mana creatures and more towards just single potent threats like Shouldred. But I don't really see Shouldred as being good against the creativity combo
Right.
itself. So yeah, it's tough.
Looks like we have a ignoble hierarch. Both the hierarch.
Yep, Bolt the Hierarch. Really important for the game where Chase is on the draw that he's able to have an untapped red source and a lightning bolt on turn 1 to keep pace. So that's not a given for a deck with a complicated mana base and a lot of lands that enter the battlefield tapped.
Mm-hmm. Dwarven mines aren't free for a lot of reasons. Interesting. You don't really see Blood Crypt into Sacred Foundry too often when carving out with the creativity deck.
That is a good clean answer to Strangled Rootgeist, exiling it.
One of your faves.
Yeah, turn 3 Grist, uncontested. This is just what Michael wants. In fact, like this is just a great draw from Michael because a lot of games you're going to have to keep an opening hand where you're pretty reliant on your turn 1 mana dork. Like maybe you don't have a lot of extra lands or you're missing a spot in your mana curve. And if your mana dork gets burned, you might have to say go on one of those key turns in the early games. But Michael's just had 1, 2, 3 without missing a beat, so he's a happy camper here.
Oh wait, Chase was asking him like, what the heck happened to that swamp? It kind of looks like all of Michael's friends drew on it or something like that.
That's cool. Like to have a story behind a card.
All right. Do we have a Yawgmoth? Yawgmoth would be decent here.
Michael attacked pretty quickly and then paused to think, which the only thing I make of that is that he's probably not considering a Court of Calling for this turn.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, here's Yawgmoth. So this is just Michael has played the best card he could play on every turn of the game so far.
Right. And also, it's not so easy for Chase to creativity in the face of
Great
Yawgmoth
point. Yeah.
off of
Yep.
dwarves.
Totally shuts down Dwarven Mines. But this is an easy opportunity for Chase to kill the Yawgmoth. Leyline Binding would be the easiest, but it looks like this is going to be
Mhm.
double Lightning Bolt. And
So it looks like
funny, Jarvis, we had the discussion about shortcutting in game
yeah.
one, where we had the little bit of the confusion about the spell pierce. So this time, Michael says, "No, you're not double bolting my creature. You're resolving one lightning bolt. I'm responding to the second one," which
Mhm.
I like that. You know, let's recenter and just, I mean, play it like a tournament match.
I mean, yeah, both of these guys are in good position, so just keep things solid, keep things clean, communicate well, and play your best magic.
That's the key. That's all there is to it.
I've been pretty impressed with Michael's plays so far. It's just game one, I think it was just a little bit too much for him to handle.
Yeah, of course. You know, he lost pretty badly in game one, but I liked his demeanor. It didn't seem like he was panicking in the face of some unfavorable conditions. So, I'm all for it. I like the deck. I like the way Michael's playing. I'm rooting for him.
Looks like a Jetmir Garden was fetched. Hmm. Well, I wonder if we're going to see a leyline binding off of the. Nope, no leyline binding.
I think Michael's holding up a copy of Boseiju, which is not super helpful against Dwarven Mine, but he's got the Fatal Push for a Dwarf token.
Hmm. I'm more interested in that fatal push being cited in. Would you cite it in?
I would not, but
Mhm.
we've seen people like basically across the board being willing to fight the battle over the dwarf tokens. So this includes engineered explosives. We've seen against creativity post board. We've seen
Mhm.
crime and punishment against creativity post board, which that one was a big surprise to me. And fatal push now also, which is a hedge against Fable the Mirror Breaker, and also can sometimes break up a creativity, as it might happen here.
So fatal push, but Boseiju doesn't do anything. So there being two tokens might be a little bit too much, right? Oh,
Well, I mean, the fatal push will stop this from being a runaway. So
right.
what we might see here is Chase using creativity for two. Michael's able to kill one of the dwarves, so Chase gets one Archon, or hey, one Sundering Titan. Then Michael maybe loses an insect token or some lands or whatever, and then uses the grist to clean things up, and the game continues.
Yeah, this is definitely a scenario where you would much rather hit Archon than Sundering Titan. I think if you hit Sundering Titan, you can choose the Jetmir Garden as your plains and mountain, and then Michael would be forced to, or hold on, God damn it, it's been a while since I played with Sundering Titan. I think what I'm mostly saying is correct. You can basically double pick a land.
Okay, so Michael fighting the good fight here. He discards Boseiju. He sacrifices one
Hmm.
insect. He uses endurance, targeting Chase, which I think that's mostly going to be effective against Ren and Six.
Persist as well was seen in game one, right?
Good call. And now he's going to untap, kill that Archon with the Grist, and keep fighting. I don't imagine he's getting anywhere close to the -5 being lethal,
Mm-hmm.
especially after Chase gains 3 life.
He's doing his best to cut off further creativities by playing a Yawgmoth here, though.
he took a pretty safe route there, just immediately killing the the Archon with the grist. He could have, gotten started doing something with the Yawgmoth, like
Mhm,
Yawgmoth on a board with an active grist and two other creatures.
mhm.
You can sort of take your chances with trying to make something happen, but I think it's appropriate to just take the nice safe route here.
Also, given that Michael had at least one of those undying creatures in his hand last turn, he just knew he had it rolled up, so there's no reason to take risks. Like this setup is basically, I wouldn't call it quite necropotence, but it's pretty close. Actually, it is necropotence, right?
It's Yawgmoth's bargain to be more specific.
Oh, that's flavorful.
But yeah,
Actually,
the only risk here was basically the Yawgmoth getting killed. But if Chase can't get the Yawgmoth off the battlefield, Michael's going to find a way to win here. If you haven't seen this combo yet, the idea is you pair Yawgmoth with two Undying creatures, and you repeatedly sacrifice one to reset the counter on the other. And you can, by doing so, basically draw a number of cards equal to the amount of life you're willing to pay. And eventually, you can find something to spice up your combo, like a Blood Artist that lets you go fully infinite and kill off the opponent. But you could also just play a bunch of creatures and be content with that.
I think it's interesting to note that basically all of the Yawgmoth lists I've seen cut Giraffe Messenger.
Yes. Yeah, that's not necessary to combo off, and it's difficult to cast. Okay, so having a look at Michael's deck, once he has this combo set up, the cards he's most looking for are Blood Artist, which results in just a kill. Your opponent will die while you're breaking even on life. Prosperous Innkeeper, which lets you go infinite and draw as many cards as you like. Or Hapatra, Vizier of Poisons, which lets you start generating snake creature tokens as you go along. And then, of course, Chord of Calling is a huge part of the combo because you can continue finding key pieces without having to spend any mana just by convoking.
Mhm. So basically, what happened this turn was I think Chase asked, "What happens if I veil a Yawgmoth activation?" And so the Geist Undying was on the stack, Veil was cast, and then Michael just used a Young Wolf to kill the token instead by sacrificing it and after it undied.
I see. And then there was no black spell cast that turn, so Chase doesn't even draw a card off the veil, which is
Right.
pretty important.
An Archon hit the graveyard, and we're going to a game 3.
Basically, perfect game for Michael. He did exactly what he needed to do.
Mm-hmm.
And Chase went for a creativity for 2, which normally would win the game, but Michael was able to sort of piecemeal his answers. One fatal push saved the game from being a total runaway. Then his strong board position plus the grist took care of the Archon. And from there, he rebuilt and won with Yawgmoth. So everything going really, really smoothly. That's exactly what he needs to happen. But yeah, make no mistake. I think this is a tough matchup, and going into game 3 being
Mm-hmm.
on the draw against creativity is pretty scary.
Definitely hoping that your Thoughtseize doesn't get Veil of Summered.
Yeah, you don't want your Thoughtseize to get veiled. You don't want your Birds of Paradise to get rend. The main question is, or a big question that I'm curious about is are you gonna trim any of your mana creatures when you're on the draw against a Ren and Six deck?
I think I saw one Birds of Paradise in the Channel Fireball deck box.
Okay, that makes sense to me. It's difficult, if not impossible, to cut all of your one toughness creatures, but
Right.
being a little bit less reliant on them can be a good thing.
Well, there's the Thoughtseize. There's
Dryad
the Dryad.
Arbor as
Yeah.
potentially the only land in the opener. Oh,
Well,
no,
we
no,
have
that's Swamp.
it's the scribbled on swamp, right? But
Mhm.
Michael's like, I can do better than this. The Dried Arbor is just too much of a liability as your only green source.
Yeah, so there are some matchups maybe where you'd keep that and play Dryad Arbor and wait for that to deliver up green mana, but uh, definitely on the draw, like in this matchup, it's way too likely that that meets a burn spell or a Ren and Six.
Right. I do want to know the story behind that swamp. I think that would be a cool one to find out what actually happened to it. All right. Let's see what we got for Michael and for Chase. Oh,
So we learned that the swamp was a gift from Michael's brother. As I said, nice to have a story behind your cards.
looks like they're
Okay,
both S.
yep,
Yeah,
both
sorry.
satisfied with 6 cards.
Yep,
All
we're
right,
just
the old no red and six chant. I have
yeah,
been there a lot in my career. No red and six, no red and six, no red and six, anything but red and six.
yeah. The problem is, I think you just have to take your medicine and risk it.
Oh, of course. I mean, what else is Ignoble Hierarch doing in your deck if not to cast it on turn one?
All right, it getting ending, that's perfectly fine. That's not a Ren and Six disaster.
And once again, the Strangleroot Geist is really good at preventing the total disaster from Ren. Like
Right.
a common pattern is that you play your Hierarch, your opponent plays Ren and minuses, and then
Mhm.
if you can't make a good follow-up play, you're in big trouble. But if you're able to at least play Strangleroot Geist and kill off the Planeswalker, then the game is even.
Yeah, you see some of that dynamic in the Izzet Murktide matchup where you can play like a Ragavan into it, and then they Ren minus, and then you dash your second Ragavan.
Yep, for sure.
All right, Chase, what you got this turn? You got something good? Any fables?
Is Teferi Time Raveler a card that you'd expect to see after sideboarding?
Um, I think it's okay, not great, is how I would put it. I think that's like an easy card to side out if you do want to add cards from your sideboard. I wouldn't expect all of the copies of Teferi to be in anymore.
Okay, Fable. Um, I would say that's a good card in the matchup. You're not usually going to get to attack uncontested with the Goblin Shaman, but you're going to get your value.
So Michael's hand is Grist, Prosperous Innkeeper. Was that a Young Wolf and a Verdant Catacombs? Oh, the cards are being shuffled too fast.
Yeah, Grist, Prosperous Innkeeper, Young Wolf, and a land.
Okay. So Michael really thinking it through before he does anything. Love to see it. What do you make of not playing the Grist there? And interestingly, he didn't play the land. No, sorry, he was on the draw. So this is his turn 3, right? Wait, yeah. Never mind.
It's fine to not play the Grist because just building out your board of creatures is
Mhm.
really important. And I might be thinking like if my uh Geist meets, say, a prismatic ending, then the Goblin Shaman can successfully threaten the Grist. Yeah, I don't the way that Michael has chosen to approach the game.
Hmm.
You want to be careful when you're dealing with the threat of Archon of Cruelty that you don't accidentally lose the best cards out of your hand
Right.
to discarding. But it seems to me that Chase will not be able to creativity for 2 this turn, and so Michael will be able to keep the Grist nice and safe.
We're getting into a good old-fashioned board stall. Whoa! What about this attack into the Geist?
Makes me think Chase is he's just more interested in a Lotus Petal than a Goblin Shaman. Maybe trying to ramp his way up to hard casting an Archon or insulating against the Magus of the Moon. There's a lot to think about.
You think I'll go up or down? Guess up was the answer.
I think you want to go up there unless you have a very very specific read on the situation and like think that Chase needs the treasure for something.
Hmm.
But the last thing you want to happen is for an Archon to hit the battlefield and you to find yourself with a Grist on one counter, unable to kill it.
Hmm.
But I like how Michael has navigated. He played out his hand. He's got the Grist ready to go to counteract an Archon. He is prepared to leverage a Yawgmoth, Eldritch Evolution, or Court of Calling if he finds one. But this is scary right here. I mean, Chase can combo, and he's got a lot of card selection from these Fabled the Mirror Breakers. So big turn here, one way or another.
Hmm. So we have two fables going off here. Well, that's no help.
Discarding one card, interesting.
Hmm. What do you make of not discarding the Prismari command?
Yeah, I think it's a fair question. It so okay, like let's think about what happens if Michael draws Yawgmoth. On the current board state, uncontested, it's a win because
Hmm.
Michael has 2 Undying Creatures plus Prosperous Innkeeper.
Yep.
Now, with the Prismari command, you could kill off the Strangleroot Geist and you're not deterministically dead. But boy, that's still a scary situation.
Right.
So I think on balance, I would have leaned towards discarding both cards to
Hmm.
dig a little deeper, but certainly not obvious. And you know, I trust Chase's judgment that he's taking the game the direction he wants it to go.
Looks like Michael's probably fetching up Dryad Arbor this turn, if I had to guess. You really could tell that was probably going to happen because he left the fetch uncracked and he used his treasure to cast Ignoble Hierarch.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, he really wants to go wide on creatures for a couple of reasons, but importantly, if an Archon gets cast, he wants to not have to sacrifice any meaningful material.
Also, what if you just draw the Dryad Arbor? That happens sometimes.
Hmm, hmm.
Just like Progenitus. Oh,
Oh, he found cord, and he's
he,
going for it immediately.
yeah, he just slammed that. Wait,
Okay,
one,
so
two.
Chase has the Prismari command.
Mhm.
Remember, he with Prismari command as the only card in his hand, he can't loot into anything. So he's really just down to I have to shock one of your creatures in response, and it should be the Strangleroot Geist.
Yep, I agree. Probably shock
But
plus make a treasure, right?
yeah, this is a really good spot
Hmm.
for Michael. What you're going to see is he gets to use his dinky creatures like Dryad Arbor and Ignoble Hierarch, which, by the way, props for searching up the Dryad Arbor. That's going to be really meaningful here.
Mhm.
He gets to use those creatures to reset the counter on Young Wolf. So
Mhm.
basically, Dryad Arbor turns into I draw a card and reset the counter on Young Wolf. Then I sacrifice the Young Wolf to draw another card. So
Mhm.
every little creature turns into 2 points of card drawing. And he's going to have a lot of shots to draw into more creatures. He hasn't made his land drop yet, or eventually find another Undying creature or a Chord of Calling to get one, and then he will win the game. So
And I was
this is
thinking,
yeah,
yeah.
not for sure a win, but it's really really good for Michael. Put it that way.
Also, a really nice thing is because of Prosperous Innkeeper, you don't actually go down on life. So I think it's really hard to brick here. Well, sorry, you don't go down on life when the Young Wolf comes back, is what I should actually say.
Correct. Yep. And then also just killing off the reflection of Kiki Jiki is quite important. Pretty sure that reflection has summoning sickness because the fables were staggered, you know, uh one chapter ahead of one another, right?
Right.
The Yawgmoth deck only plays one Dryad Arbor most often, so I like Michael's uh, his approach to fetch early. Then he's going to tap his Twilight Mire to float some mana and
Mhm.
play Ignoble Hierarch, which cycling through for two more card draws. He's looking for Young Wolf is the best thing. I think he found Chord of Calling, but he needs to get ahead on creatures somehow if he's going to resolve that to get the second Young Wolf. So I'm not sure if I think he probably did leave in endurance, so that's one thing he could draw for is endurance to represent a free creature to get on the battlefield.
So yeah, with the floating green, you could evoke Endurance, target Chase, in response to the evoke trigger, tap Endurance, Young Wolf, Yawgmoth to chord for one to get the missing piece, right?
Yeah, that's the idea. But there is a limit to how much you can draw, and it
Mhm.
looks like Michael is going to have a good turn, but not actually win the game.
I guess perhaps he decided it wasn't worth doing that because all of his lands are tapped. So it's kind of hard to progress from there, right?
I mean, he went as far as he could without sacrificing a combo piece. The next
Mhm.
thing he would have had to do is sacrifice the Prosperous Innkeeper to dig deeper.
Mhm.
This is actually a common pitfall with Yawgmoth is to get overexcited and like sacrifice too much of your board and wind up not winning the game. So Michael decided to pump the brakes and say like, "Hey, I had a great turn. I killed off the Fable. Let's just try to win next turn, assuming nothing goes too wrong."
I like that because kind of feel like you should just plan for the worst case scenario instead of, sacrificing your entire board, end up with like 13 cards in your hand and like discard 6 cards, or something somewhere in that vein.
So now the cord is good to go. He finds a second Undying creature. This is the combo.
Hmm.
So you're going to see him drawing an unbounded number of cards because every time an Undying creature gets sacrificed, it comes back and resets the counter on the other one. Every time this happens, Michael breaks even on life because of the Prosperous Innkeeper. So he can just pick up as many cards as he wants in his quest to find an additional combo piece like the Blood Artist.
Does Michael still have 2x endurance in his deck?
I don't know. I was just basing it on having seen
Mhm.
one in game number two that he
Sure.
probably had some after sideboard. He has access to the full four, so how many
Right.
he chose to board in.
Fair enough. Um, well, impressive showing for the Golgari Yawgmoth deck. That game three didn't. It kind of looked like Chase didn't have the ability to fire creativity at any point, right?
Yeah, for sure. So this creativity deck, we've been impressed in general in its well-roundedness and its ability to win games in the absence of indomitable creativity, but that's not the matchup for it. Yawgmoth
Mhm.
is really, really good at people who are at beating people who are trying to play a fair game. So for creativity to win, you need to buy some time with your removal spells and then execute your combo and really put the opponent in a body bag. And that happened in game number 1, but it didn't happen in game number 3. Game number 3 was just a couple of removal spells and a couple fables, and that's usually not good enough to beat Yawgmoth.
The reason I was asking about 2x endurance is I think your unbounded comment is not correct. Oh, I guess you could have the endurance shuffle itself in.
Yeah, I mean it is technically not it's not infinite, but it's enough. Like you could go through
Mm,
your whole library and then some plus endurance. But yeah, it's true that if your opponent was at 100 million life, you wouldn't be able to necessarily kill them.
I'm
Um,
sorry, I had to bring that up because I am a mathematician. We gotta pump the brakes on that one a little
Jarvis
bit.
keeps me honest with my my mathematical terminology.